In this video, you'll learn the mechanics of mixing two colors in watercolor and get some practice achieving the mixture you want at the strength you want. For this lesson, you'll need a 1/16 sheet of watercolor paper on which you have drawn some rows of squares or circles, your choice, like this. Make 5 squares or circles across and as many rows as you have space for, but at least 4. A penny or nickel works well as a circle template for this exercise. Or you can use a ruler to draw squares, or just draw freehand. Whichever method you choose, make sure there is space between your shapes so that wet color will not run into adjacent areas. You will also need a piece of scrap watercolor paper for testing color. You can use the back of another exercise sheet if you like. Often, beginners struggle to mix exactly the color they want, going back and forth and ending up with a giant puddle of paint and a lot of frustration. Usually, this is because of too much brush rinsing out of concerns about contaminating the paint in your paint wells. I'm going to show you a method of mixing that will eliminate any problems with contamination, but first, let me take a moment to show you how to clean a contaminated paint well so you can stop worrying about it. There are times when you might just want to let it happen. Suppose I'm working with a puddle of red, and I decide I need to make it just a tad orangey, so oops! I stick my brush in some yellow without rinsing and get red paint in the well. If this happens to you, just keep painting. Because we sweep color off the surface instead of jabbing the point of our brushes into the paint, this red is all sitting up on the surface. So when I'm done with whatever I was doing, I can just take my spray bottle and sponge and rinse off that red like this. I put the sponge below the well and then tip the palette so that as I spray, the excess water and the red paint simply rinse off into the sponge. And now my paint well is clean again. So if you do accidentally contaminate a paint well, just keep painting, no worries. But now let's learn how to mix in a way that will help prevent that and get the color you want without a lot of fussing. As you watch this video, keep in mind that your monitor might not show colors the same as mine, so focus on the process. Start by mixing a nice puddle of burnt sienna or burnt umber on one side. Then rinse your brush and blot it dry, and mix a nice strong puddle of juicy ultramarine or cobalt blue. We're going to use this brown and blue combination to make a nice neutral gray. Now, without rinsing your brush, drag some of the blue mixture up into the center of your palette. We'll call this our mixing puddle. And again, without rinsing your brush, drag some of your brown into your mixing puddle and swirl the two together. We're looking for a nice neutral gray like this, but color is hard to judge on your palette, so be sure to test it on another sheet of paper and see if you like it. If it's a little bit too blue, add some brown. If it's a little bit too brown, add some blue. But notice I have not rinsed my brush at all during this whole process, so I'm not diluting my color, I'm keeping it nice and strong. Once you manage to get a nice neutral gray, put that in the center circle of the top row. Then modify it to a somewhat warmer gray by adding a bit more brown, and put that in the next circle to the left. And then still more brown until it's more of a grayish brown than a brownish gray, and put that in the circle all the way to the left. On the other side, make a cooler gray by adding a bit more blue to make a bluish gray, and then even more blue to make a grayish blue. Now that you've seen the process once, pause the video and do a second row for some additional practice. Remember, there's no need to keep rinsing your brush since you're not going back into your paint wells and don't have to worry about contaminating them. Repeatedly rinsing your brush as you are mixing often inadvertently adds more and more water to the mixture. The end result of this is a giant puddle of wishy-washy color and a lot of frustration. One time that you do want to add more water is to get a paler version of your color. This is sometimes called a tint. Let's try this with our red to make a nice range of pinks. We'll mix a nice, strong, juicy puddle of red, and we'll use clear water as our other color. It's a little bit harder to see, but it's the same procedure. I have a puddle of clear water on one side and my strong red on the other side. And my palette happens to have a little barrier here, but you can still use approximately the same idea that we used the last time, dragging color back and forth to get the strength that you like. So now let's fill in our sheet, starting with the pure, strong red over on the left, and gradually diluting your color until you get a pale tint of pink on the right. After you've done the first row, you can go back and do another row for more practice. As you can see, my two rows aren't identical, and that's okay. The most important thing is to practice observing what happens as you add more water to your strong color to dilute it. If you have additional rows of circles or squares, I suggest you try combining a few other colors. Remember, anytime you need more space to work, you can pick up your sponge and clear some space on your palette. For this video, so that you could see what I was doing, I made quite large puddles far apart. But in practice, sometimes you'll work with smaller petals close together if the areas that you're going to fill with color are not very large and you don't need much paint. Mixing intermediate colors from two single color puddles helps you mix strong, vibrant intermediate colors without over dilution and without contaminating the paint wells on your palette.